Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Mr. Hartman with some more Section 2 of the Cold War Social Science. And today we're going to talk about the espionage, the actual spy or allegedly spying by the Soviet Union within the United States. And we're going to start with the Alger-Hiss affair. I believe it's Alger. I don't think it's Alger. No, I could be wrong. So after the Hollywood hearings in 1947, WAC shifted its focus to Foggy Bottom in 1948, which is the headquarters of the State Department. And here they uncovered charges of espionage against Alger-Hiss with the help of the FBI. Alger-Hiss was a respected State Department official who had actually attended the Yalta Conference with Roosevelt, I believe. I believe that was still Roosevelt. And the allegations against Alger-Hiss relied on the testimony of Whittaker Chambers, who's a journalist and ex-communist and a close friend of Hiss, or previously was a close friend of Hiss. And Whittaker Chambers admitted that he himself spied for the Soviets. He had acted as a courier of stolen government documents until the late 1930s. So Chambers, the reason Chambers isn't the big deal here is because he's not a government employee, right? He's a journalist. And he testified before WAC that Hiss belonged to the same Washington spy network as Chambers. This testimonial came in August of 1948. Hiss, of course, denied the allegations, but he even went as far to sue Chambers for libel, which is lying about somebody, Chambers then led investigators to a farm in rural Maryland where he had hidden these microfilm canisters. Microfilm is like you can put documents on. It's like almost like a USB key of the day. You could put a bunch of documents in this tiny little microfilm, and you could then blow it up later on to get the full pages. It had 65 pages of State Department documents. And it was given to him by Hiss in a hollowed-out pumpkin. Interesting. And so the pumpkin papers, which is what Chambers' testimonial is called, led a federal court to indict Hiss for perjury. The first trial ended in a hung jury. Basically, they couldn't come to a unanimous conclusion. Eventually, though, I guess in the second trial, Hiss was convicted and sentenced to federal prison. He would maintain his innocence for the rest of his life. And nobody actually knows whether he was a Soviet spy or not. But the Hiss affair is important because it is the first kind of political theater of congressional hearings, because the national media tuned in. So it made espionage like more normal for people, I guess, in a way, or more like understandable and like real. And also to help Republican politicians construct this narrative that Truman was soft on communism, which had already been helped by the communists in China winning the revolution there. I guess not yet. That will happen later on, right? And then the public attention to WAC also helped catapult Richard Nixon into prominence. He was a young Republican congressman from California at the time. He was a World War II veteran. In 1950, Nixon was a representative at first, but then because of this, right, in 1950, he was then elected to the Senate. And 2 years later, he becomes vice president of the U.S. to Eisenhower. And his political rise is mostly tied to his reputation as a strong anti-communist, and he was one of the attack dogs on the WAC committees. And then the second espionage thing here is the Rosenbergs. And so in early 1950, the British police arrested a scientist on the Manhattan Project known as Klaus Fuchs. This is at the same time that Hiss's case had reached its conclusion. And Fuchs had stood accused of passing nuclear secrets to the Soviets, which actually kind of aligned with some ideas because the Soviets had surprised the U.S. by being able to test their own atomic bomb in 1949, leading to the idea that maybe the Soviets had stolen those ideas from the U.S. in one way or the other. And so under FBI interrogation, Fuchs revealed that he had been part of a spy ring. He led investigators to the next, kind of link in the chain, David Greenglass, who was a mechanist at the Los Alamos site where they were making nuclear weapons. Greenglass himself confessed and then also implicated his brother-in-law, Julius Rosenberg, who was an electrical engineer from Brooklyn, an unassuming electrical engineer from Brooklyn. Rosenberg maintained his innocence. However, due to the decryption of old Soviet records, it's actually been found out that he did spy for the Soviets. To get Rosenberg to talk, the Justice Department indicted his wife, Ethel Rosenberg. They had no evidence, if any, of her guilt. And so they would eventually prosecute both Rosenberg in federal court in 1951. This is at the same time that Americans were going out to Korea, and then also anti-communism at this point was at probably its highest. The judge over the case called their treachery worse than murder and sentenced them to death, which is heavy. 2 years later, 1953, the Rosenbergs are executed despite international appeals for mercy, leaving the two couple's orphan children, the couple's two orphan children, to be raised by different family friends. And this decision has obviously been criticized by historians for kind of going too far. And just like the Hiss affair, the Rosenberg trial created a lot of drama, placing spying and espionage at the center of all Americans' attention and imagination, right? Kind of now all of a sudden, maybe every neighbor, this is just a normal guy from Brooklyn, right? So anybody could be a Soviet spy, right? And this lent credibility to the idea that communist agents pose a serious threat to America's national security, and added fuel to the fire of the anti-communist hysteria of the early 1950s that we now call McCarthyism. And McCarthyism is going to be the subject of our next video. It's a very, very important, very kind of dark period of American history. But until that video, I will see you in the next one.